on Daf Ayin 70a, and we got up to Amar Rav Anan, which is the third line from the top at the end of the line. Amar Rav Anan, Amar Shmuel. Money that belongs to orphans to an estate that's being, administered by an executor, then can be lent with interest. Amalei of Nachman, this is a very surprising statement. Mishum diyasmininu safina lahu isura. Like just because they're yisomim, because it's an estate, because they're. I mean, we do make allowances in certain things for the estate, and we're talking about the estate of minors, right? Of minor heirs of the deceased. But because they're minors, like we allow them to, you can feed them something forbidden. In other words, you can allow them to disregard this mitzvah. Yasme de achle the lavdi tu leislu basar shavaiku. In that case, he's saying like orphans that profit from something that is not theirs, meaning that they take illegal interest, then what's going to happen to them? They're going to follow the deceased to the graveyard. In other words, this is not a good idea. Amalei, so Rav Nachman says, Emily Ezu, Gufa de Uvda Hechehava. He says, okay, Rav Anan, you said this in the name of Shmuel. Like maybe you inferred this from some case, something that he said or something that he did. Tell us how you came to this citation of Shmuel. Amalei, so he says, How duda devnei Mar Ukva? There was a pot that belonged to the children of Mar Ukva, and Mar Ukva had died, and they were minor orphans. Dehavabe Mar Shmuel, and Shmuel was the executor. Takel v'yayvle, so he would weigh it and then lend it out or rent it out. Takel v'shakile, and then when he would take it back, when the rental period was over, he would weigh it again to see there was any difference in weight. So presumably it's a kind of pot that with use it deteriorated or depreciated, and you could measure that. So he would charge the renter, for the depreciation. Shakil agra, the shakil pachasa. So what's he doing? He's taking both a rental fee, right? He's taking rent for the pot, and he's also charging them for the depreciation. So, according to this kind of goes hand in hand with what we've been seeing all along, which is that you can't, if you're doing both of those, then that's the same as lending with interest, right? So, and this was his reasoning: "I agra lo pachasa, vi pachasa lo agra." Like he should only have collected one, either the depreciation fee or the rent. Since he charged both, it looks like it's a case of interest. And the only conclusion is that because he was administering this on behalf of minor orphans, that's why it was allowed. Amalei, so Rav Nachman says to him, Kiha, afilu b'diknane name shari lemavad. This kind of transaction, this kind of deal can be done even by adults. Diknane is like the Dalet and the Zion are interchangeable. So like with graybeards, you could say, like even it's not because they're minors, it's because this is a particular case, Dahamakable alayu chuscha dinachasha, because the owner of the pot accepts, the loss by the depreciation of the copper of the pot. Dekama de mikle nechasha batzir deme. Since you know that there's going to be deterioration or depreciation, they can therefore accept a rental fee. Now, but like in other words, even after paying for the copper, the value of the copper that had been worn away by the use of the pot, there's still additional um, depreciation. In other words, not only is the pot have less copper, but it's also not as good of a pot. Like the pot with use becomes less useful or less, I don't know, less it has less utility in some way. Um, so
But
therefore yeah,
iron kaolin for cooking actually improve with use.
indeed, interesting. As long as you keep them seasoned.
Right. which good cooks
Um,
do.
they improve. Yeah. Um, I guess because in what sense does it improve?
Um, it makes it easier to fry things in because the coating is more amenable to
Yeah,
to
it's less sticky,
less sticky. Yeah,
right?
in the days before Teflon.
That is what I read about iron pans. My own experience has been mixed. Maybe I'm not doing it right. Clearly, I'm not doing it right. I guess it has to be, seasoned again now and then, right?
Right, right.
And I'm not sure that, and there's a lot of conflicting advice on exactly the best way to do that on the internet anyway.
Yeah,
However,
and
your
actually, I
point
can
is
tell
well
you that
taken.
what kind of oil you use actually makes a big difference. You don't want to ever fry in olive oil, but that's a separate issue.
Right. Oh, you mean what kind of oil you use when you're cooking with it or when you're
Yeah,
seasoning it?
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well,
Interesting.
yeah, both. Yeah, don't use olive oil.
Uh-huh. Okay, good to know.
Yeah,
Um, okay. Um, okay, so anyway, the point is that this kind of deal, it's not because of the orphans, it's because the nature of the pot allows for, there's further deterioration that you're not charging separately for. So that is that makes it not rebates. Amar Rabba Bar Shila Amar of Chisda. The Amri La Amar Rabba Bar Yosef Bar Chama Amar of Sheshes. One of these traditions were mostly Somi, money belonging to the minor orphans, Mutar Lahalvosin, you can lend them out. Karov L'Sachar V'Rachod L'Hefsed, um, where where it's very likely that it's going to make profit and unlikely that it will lose money. Um, in other words, the understanding is that um, it's not that the investment is better, it's that you're basically except unless the circumstances are extreme, perhaps that's why it says karo or rachok, but you're going to give the orphans their some profit even if the deal doesn't go so well. So that is a concession we make to minor orphans. um, so I think that the difference is that this is, I mean, it's fine. We don't have any problem saying that we're going to waive rabbinic types of ribis for orphans, right? That would not be a problem. It's only when we thought it was a doraisa thing that we said, look, we can't, we're not going to say that the estate doesn't have the same mitzvah as everybody else. If it's a rabbinic thing, then built in can be a leniency for orphans or what have you. Um, and that's a common thing that you see in many there are many kinds of exemptions from Durabanan rules for particular circumstances where it's deemed useful or beneficial in some way. Tanurabanan.
Is that
Rabbi
what
Stop.
when Rashi says there, you can say, שהיו יתומים נוטלים חלק בשכר ואין נוטלים חלק בהפסד, אבל ריבית ממש לא. So is that the emphasis that where he says it's
Yeah,
ריבית
so
ממש?
it's kind of it's a little unclear exactly how the contract would be worded, but or maybe it's like outside of the contract, like you have a regular contract, but if it doesn't end up making money, then you're still going to give the some profit to the Yisomim. Um, or if it doesn't make, maybe it doesn't make as much as you thought it would, you're still going to give a full share of profit to the Yisomim. Um, so if you look at it a certain way, it's not really ribis, or it's only rabbinic ribis.
Well, he's
But
saying, but he says ribbit mamash. No, that's he's not considering. Or he said, but you can't give it with what we consider real ribbit. Is that what he's saying?
yes,
It's in
exactly.
situation.
Right. Maybe I would say classic ribis, or something that can't be disguised or isn't being disguised as a workaround.
Mm.
Tanrabanan, the rabbis taught, Karvel Sachar V'Rachok Lahafsid, this kind of deal, which you're more or less guaranteed, you're almost guaranteed to profit. Russia. Now, we're not talking about Yusomim anymore. This is if just for a regular business deal, if you do it this way, then you're wicked. Karv lahafsed v'karv v'rachok l'schar. If it's a deal where you're planning for the investor to absorb a loss and not get profit, chassid, then you're being very generous. Karv lezev lezeh, rachok mizeh mizeh. If you're planning to, always provide profit or never provide profit, zui midas kol. In other words, if you write the contract so that you protect yourself against losses, and you're not too generous on the return on the profit, that's what everybody does. Everybody tries to write the contract so that they're to their advantage, but you can't do it in a way that completely cuts out the investor. Amalei Rabba Rav Yosef. Going back to orphans. Hane Zuze Diyasme, or the money of the estate. Hechev Din Lahu, how do you manage it? Amalei Mosvin Lahu Beidina, you give it over to a court to manage it for them. V'yavin Lahu Zuza Zuza, and they pay them out dollar by dollar, what they need to live, for their living expenses. Amalei Sarabasatim Vaha Kalkalya Karna. If you do that, they're going to run out of money, right? If you don't invest it for a profit, you're going into the principal, and they're going to run out of money. Amarle Marhechiavi. Okay, what do you think what do you suggest? Amarle says, but Kinan Gavra di Isle Dava Pricha. Go find somebody who's wealthy and has like gold, like chips of gold, right? V'naktinan dava mine, and take that gold as security. V'yavin lahu niale, and give him the money, lend him the money or invest the money with him. Karv l'sachar v'rachal lahefsed, and write the terms so that the orphans are likely to benefit. Aval davar mesuyam lo, but so you can do that with these like chips of gold or shavings of gold, but you can't use like a gold bar. Dilma pikananinhu, because that could be considered a deposit. The asimari yav simanim v'shakile, and the guy's going to come and say, this is my thing. Like, look at the registration number on the gold bar. This is mine. What are you doing with it? And take it away. So, oh no, not that one of the parties to the deal, but maybe this item isn't really his, right? He's giving you this gold bar as security. It turns out it's not really his. And so you lose the deposit on the investment. Okay, that's just a kind of a cautionary note how you should I mean, anyone is free to do that, but if you're administering somebody else's money, particularly somim, be careful about what you take as a pikadon. But the gold shavings, like, they don't have any identifying marks. Nobody can come and claim it as their own. No third party can claim it. Amar Vashi Tenach imishtachach gavra di'isli dava pricha. Okay, that's great. If you can find somebody who has some deposit that can't be identified, and he's a wealthy person, or a reputation as a good investor, that's a great idea. But what if you can't find somebody like that? So because of that, like, this is your only answer. Like, this is not a common situation, right? You're saying that, like, this is the only way you can protect the Yisomim. There's going to be a lot of people not protected because they can't find this situation. Elamar Vashi, Chazina Gavra de Mishapu Nichse. Look for somebody who has stable, investments, stable properties. Umehaman, and he's trustworthy. Vishamadina Daraisa, and he listens to the mitzvahs, to the rules of the Torah. V'lomakabel Shamtad Rabban, and he's never been excommunicated. So find an honest, wealthy person. And go to court, and in the court you give him the assets of the Yisomim so that he can manage for them. Okay, so that presumably you can always find somebody who is a suitable person to manage the assets of the Yisomim, and do it in court, to give it Either that could be for protection of the Yisomim's assets, or it could be just to give the guy the authority, the recognized authority that he has to invest this money. Okay, next Mishnah. Ein mekabelin tzon barzel miyisrael. We saw this yesterday. You can't accept tzon barzel that's like an ironclad asset from Israel, from a Jew, as a profit sharing thing. Because the dividend, the money that the investor gets would be considered interest. But you can do this with a non-Jew. And you can borrow from them with interest or lend them with interest. Likewise with a ger toshav. So we'll see what that is in the Gemara. But generally speaking, a ger toshav is usually means someone who is a non-Jew who accepts the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, the Noachite laws, and so he still is a non-Jew, and you can still lend or borrow with interest. Malvi Yisrael Ma'asov Shalakum, and you can also lend out a non-Jew's money. If you're a Jew, you can lend out his money, midas akum, with his authorization, of a lo midas Yisrael, but not with if it requires the consent of a Jewish person. So, in other words, if a Jew lending to a non-Jew, and the non-Jew wants to transfer that investment / loan to another Jew, and so it needs the authorization of the lender who is Jewish, you can't do that. Okay, in other words, you can't use a non-Jew as a middleman to lend or borrow with interest from where the original investor / lender is Jewish. Okay, so Lamemra, so Gemara asks, does this mean to Bershusa de Mekabel Kaima that the capital of this ironclad investment is that it's owned by the managing party, by the one that receives the asset? Raminu, but we have a question from another Mishnah. If you accept this this asset from non-Jews, Velados Peturim min Bechara, then the anything that's born to it, like the firstborns of the animal, of this, let's say it's a sheep. Apparently, it was common to do this with sheep. That's considered to be in the possession of the non-Jew, right? And that's the one who provided the investment, right? The investor. So it seems like why would it not be subject to Bechor? Because it's still under his ownership, right? And here our Mishnah seems to be saying it's under the ownership of the borrower or the manager. Rabbi Lukasha, no problem. The Mishnah about the Bechor is where the owner accepts the risk of loss, right? If it dies or if it depreciates, the original owner, the investor, takes on himself the depreciation or the loss. So then, he's considered the owner, and therefore it's not subject to the rules of Bechor. But our Mishnah, if the investor doesn't accept that risk, it's like, I'm giving this to you. If it dies, it's your problem, right? You have to return it to me or return its value to me. Then it is under the control and ownership, as it were, of the manager, the recipient. Rava says, if that's the case, like if you're going to say it's where the original owner, the investor, accepts the risk, Son Barzel Karisle, so then it's not Son Barzel, right? That's not the meaning of, Barzel means like no matter what happens, you have to return it to me. It's an ironclad investment, an ironclad investment, right? So what do you mean? Then it's a contradiction in terms if you say it's Son Barzel, but the original owner is accepting the risk. That's not Son Barzel. The Ode also Adatani Seifa. Look at the rest of our Mishnah. You can accept ironclad investments from a non-Jew, liflog b'didei. Like if you want to make a distinction, then you can say you don't have to bring in a non-Jew. You could say if you want to make a distinction, you could say, even with the Jewish investor, it depends on whether the investor accepts the risk, right? So your answer is not a good answer. So we still have a contradiction between our Mishnah and the Bukhara's Mishnah. So Rava answers, we're not talking about where the investor accepts the risk. But what's the difference between Bechor and between our considerations of Ribius? This is why we say that there's no rules of Bechor for the firstborn. Kevan de'iloi yahiv zuze asinachri tafis la behema. So because the non-Jew, he really still owns it, because if you don't pay up, he's going to come and confiscate it, right? So clearly the ownership is still his. And if he doesn't find the animal that he gave you, he's going to collect the offspring, right? The Bechor. So he owns the Bechor. So he has an ownership interest, I would say, in the Bechor. Since it's something that he might confiscate under circumstances of non-payment. So since he has an ownership interest, that nullifies the rules of Bechor. Okay.
So why is that a problem in this case? Because the Gentile owns the property, so he would be naturally exempt from Bechor, right?
Yeah. But the thing is, the Gentile gave it to you as an ironclad investment, meaning you have responsibility for it. So when it comes to Ribius, we say, yeah, you have responsibility for it. Okay, but when it comes to Bechor, we say you may have responsibility for it, but not 100%. The non-Jewish owner still has an ownership interest in it, and so that cancels the Bechor requirement, even if it doesn't interfere with the Ribius consideration.
So in that case, he would be the Jew would be obligated in Ribius to the
then yeah, so you could do that deal because you're paying, it may be interest, but you're paying it to a non-Jew, so it's okay.
But didn't we say that we shouldn't have this arrangement with a non-Jew?
No,
Well, we can.
What we said
right.
you shouldn't have is if the non-Jew is just acting as a middleman, right? If the original source of funds is really a Jew and the non-Jew borrowed it, and now he's turning around and giving it to you, right? So then that's a dodge, right? But if it's just a two-party thing, you and the non-Jew, then interest according to this Mishnah, and that's how we rule, is fine, is not a problem.
All right.
Okay. Now okay, so continuing discussing interest from a non-Jew. Marba hono beneshach v'tarbis l'chonin dalim yikbetzenu. So the pasuk says in Mishlei, somebody who increases his wealth through interest, he collects it for l'chonin dalim yikbetzenu. He collects it for someone who is nice to poor people. In other words, he's not going to get to keep his profits. He's gonna end up, forfeiting them to somebody else who will distribute them to the poor. In other words, take interest and you'll get your just desserts. You're not gonna do well with that profit. Ma'ilachon dalim. So what does that mean? Someone who distributes to the poor. Amarav Kigon Shavor Malka, like King Shavor. He was a Persian king. And the story with him was that he would, he would tax Jews and give money to non-Jews. So that's just, an example of how you could lose your money. It'll get taxed away from you. Amar of Nachman. Rav Nachman said, Amar Lehuna, Rav Huna told me, Lo nitzricha eloda filu ribis dovid kochavim. Like, what do we even need this verse for? Like, why does Mishlei have to tell you that if you violate the Torah that you're not going to profit from it? No, it's telling you that even from a non-Jew, even interest taken from a non-Jew, you're not going to profit from. Well, that's against our Mishnah. Rav Nachman Lanachri Tashich. It's not only against our Mishnah, it's a beferish in the Torah, right? The Torah says in discussing Rebbeis, Lanachri Tashich, to a stranger, a non-Jew, you can charge interest. My tashich, what does tashich mean? Lav tishoch doesn't mean that you can take interest. Whereas this lo tashich, it means paying interest, right? That you can pay interest. So maybe what the Torah means is it's okay to pay interest to a non-Jew, but you can't charge interest to a non-Jew. Um, so my answer is losagi de lavachi. Like really, that's like if you don't pay interest to a non-Jew, is that like what the Torah really wants from you? So the answer is la puke achicha delo. No, it's telling you like why does it have to tell you not don't pay interest to a non-Jew? Like that doesn't seem like a useful mitzvah, right? But the Gemara answer is no, it's the contrast. Like don't pay interest to a non-Jew, or sorry, um, but um, but when it comes to a Jew, the um, like it means that you can pay interest to a non-Jew as opposed to Jews that you can't pay interest to. So Gemara says achicha behed yachasav, but we already have the Torah says that explicitly. Achicha lo tashich, right? So that doesn't seem like a way to interpret why it's telling you about non-Jews. Gemara says level of asay v'lo tasay. That's to make it both a positive and a negative. It's like v'lo tasay, don't charge interest to your brother, to another Jew, and also charge interest only to non-Jews, meaning there's a mitzvah saseh, it's a bitul aseh if you violate that and charge interest to a Jew. Okay. Esvei, so Rava asked, Lovin mehen umalvin osam brivis. Okay, what about our Mishnah? Right? Our Mishnah says specifically you can charge interest and pay interest with a non-Jew. V'chein b'ger toshav. Right? Amar Rav Chia b'rei Rav Huna, nisracha ella b'chdei chayav. It's why do we need why do we need to tell us this? Like when is it permitted? Only when you really need to do it, right? Like so really it's not such a good idea to take it's I would say even forbidden to take interest from Gentiles, except if you really need the money. Okay. Which is a bit of a strange construct, right? Although like I don't know if this is relevant to Mishnaic times, but certainly, my understanding is that in Europe, the one of the only things Jews could do was money lending. They weren't allowed to, in many cases, weren't allowed to own land, weren't allowed to farm. So they had to be merchants or money lenders, and that's Shylock, right? So it's commonly known that this is what Jews did. And even if they wouldn't charge interest to each other, they would charge interest to the crown or to other, non-Jewish businessmen. Now, I mean, some who did this became very wealthy, right? It was big business as long as you didn't, cross the authorities and they decide they're never going to pay you back or throw you out or whatever. So it's
That
interesting
happened a
that
lot. Yeah,
it's fine. It's
couldn't-
fine as long as it's working, and they need you. But then at some point, the other whatever other pressures there were to oppress Jews or to not pay them back their money, because you could, right? You could do that, right? But then, of course, you wouldn't be able to borrow any future funds if you kick them out. So
the Jews were not part of the feudal system, could not be in the guilds. But on the other hand, Jews could travel and Christians could not.
Christians could not travel? Oh, because
Could not travel.
they were
Most Christians were serfs and could never travel unless they joined a religious order or a crusade.
interesting. I didn't know that, but it makes sense, right? Because they needed them to
Yeah,
be serfs.
they needed them to be serfs, and that only ended in Russia in 1861.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
What's the line here between b'chdei chayav, a livelihood, and becoming wealthy? I mean, some people's luxuries are other people's necessities.
Yeah, it seems very very soft, right?
To
And
have
it's a
had
strange thing.
any money at all in the Middle Ages in Christian Europe made you extremely wealthy. Most people didn't have any money.
Yeah, and in any case, it's like this is a very strange rule, right? Like here's a rule that you can violate if you need the money, right? Like what is that? Right, that
Oh.
built in. I mean, look, that's obviously. I mean, there's a built-in thing. Like if something is pikuach nefesh or something, that's an exemption from any mitzvah, right? But to have a specific mitzvah saying that you can't do this unless you need the money is very unusual, to say the least. So Ravine has a different answer. We're talking about our Mishnah, which says you can lend to non-Jews with interest, is talking about Talmidei Chachamim, whereas other people, regular people, are not permitted to do so. Why? Talmud Gozer Rabbanan, because why did the rabbi say don't lend to a non-Jew with interest? Shema Yilmod Mimasav. You're going to get used to it, right? You're going to be like, this is good business, lending with interest. Now I'm going to exploit the Jewish market too. So Kevin Talmid Chacham who lo Yilmod Mimasav. Oh, sorry, no, that's not it. I'm sorry. It's that Yilmod Mimasav is that you'll, by spending too much time with this non-Jew, you'll pick up his habits, right? You'll become socialized with those people, right? So we're not going to allow the regular people to get too cozy with the non-Jews by engaging in business transaction with them, and the way to prevent that is to say no interest. But the rabbis, the Talmidei Chachamim, we feel comfortable that they're not going to become too socialized, which is
This
also
could
interesting
also be
because
interpreted as stacking the deck for the rabbis are making their own rules for themselves.
yes, it could, and it's also unusual because there are other things that are rules that are supposed to prevent us from socializing with non-Jews, but I don't recall any exemptions for Talmidei Chachamim. This is a unique case, so it seems a little weak also.
Well, I do
Uh,
know one. There are a Talmud Chacham who is close to a ruler has a lot of exemptions for a lot of things.
Only a Talmid Chacham, or anybody who's
Well,
close
in
to a
theory,
ruler.
anybody. The idea is that only a Talmud Chacham would want to be associated with a non-Jewish ruler.
Uh-huh.
Like for instance, the chief rabbi of Britain attends the wedding of a member of the royal family, even though it's in a church.
Right. So is that because he's kind of taking
Because
the
he's
license? Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
because he's the chief rabbi.
Right. So is that because, like, is that rooted in fear of authorities, or is that rooted in we don't worry about the chief rabbi? He's not going to become a Christian.
Yeah, the chief rabbi's not. Well, actually, there have
I
been chief
always
rabbis.
assumed it was rooted in fear of the authorities. Like if the rabbi doesn't go to the church, then Christians are going to murder us or something.
Yeah, probably more of that. And there were some prominent rabbis in Spain who converted at the time of the expulsion.
Uh-huh. So it's not an ironclad
It's not
guarantee.
an enclare guarantee, and
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, let's call it here for today. See you all tomorrow. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.